Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar series. We'll give people a couple of minutes to show up, and then we'll get started.
Is this where we like shuffle around on the stage, Prayag? And
Pretty much like shuffle around, make sure the mic's working, get used to the cord going down the shirt,
yes. Oh, that's right. I remember
stuff.
those days.
I
Eat
know.
some stale snacks.
Exactly. I wish we had some like background music going
That
on.
would be fun. We could, I mean, can we not do that in post-production?
Yes, maybe in post-production when this gets posted, it's probably gonna have a few some musical element. Maybe we can get the music from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the movie, to fit with the theme of the Marvin the Robot from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
I think that would be absolutely appropriate. I would love that.
Fantastic. So a few housekeeping items before we get started. This conversation is being recorded and will be made available to the people who registered. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop those in the Q&A section. That's the best guarantee that the questions will get answered. You can drop it in the chat as well. So feel free, and please, it's encouraged to use both of those. And I think we are 3 minutes over, so let's get started. Welcome everyone. My name is Prayag. I'm the founder of Marvin. We are a qualitative research and data analysis tool and a research repository. And today we are going to talk about the impact that qual research in general has on AI systems. And my guest today is Mary Gray. Mary Gray is one of my dear friends. I'm so honored to be talking to her. Mary, for those of you who don't know, is a MacArthur Genius Fellow. She's a senior principal researcher at Microsoft, a Harvard faculty member at Indiana University, and one of the brightest minds in this domain. Welcome, Mary.
I will take any opportunity I can to sit down and talk with you, Prayag. And I see a couple of familiar faces in the chat, so I'm just really happy to be here to talk with you.
Fantastic. So, Mary, for the audience, a little bit of history lesson. We met when you were writing your book, became a bestseller, called Ghostwork. And it was, in my opinion, one of the earliest kind of attempts at dealing and talking about some of the issues dealing with AI, specifically dealing with data labeling in AI. And since then, you've done a lot of work, in AI, especially around, how to design good systems, how to be, ethically and conscious about the systems that we have been developing. But just take us back and tell us how you got into this domain. What drew you to it?
Yeah, it's so odd to think it's been 10 years. Basically, I showed up at Microsoft Research in New England after spending time at Indiana University, and really trying to figure out, like, how can I bring the anthropological approach, the critical media studies approach that I was trained to bring to conversations around what do people do with technology. I was pretty focused on how it fails people. And when I got here, I realized there was so much conversation around big data, and just the beginning of a conversation around how important big data was to the development of artificial intelligence. And I think at the time, those become marketing terms pretty quickly, right? So now we talk about machine learning or artificial general intelligence, all these terms. I wanted to understand, like, how does that translate into the work of building a system, a predictive system. So, that work really started with asking a basic question of like, how do you build a predictive system? And that immediately led to, at the time, well, we need training data when I asked my colleagues in computer science and engineering. And when you drill into what is training data, it's basically a set of decisions, priors that people have made, this, not that, if you will. And as soon as you have something that's not clearly this or that, you need a person. You need a person to decide, is that image really a purple tie? Is that word a hate word? Like all of those things that seem so simplistically this or that quickly become the meat of interpretation. Like, what do we do with words? What do we do with images as people when we're exchanging them online? So the book begins as a very basic question of who are the people who clean training data, who are producing the materials that computer science and engineering need to model human decision making. And from there, it very quickly became clear that there are plenty of businesses that are mostly startups, but larger businesses that are not looking to get rid of the person building artificial intelligence models. It's actually about mixing a moment of human judgment and everything else that can be predictively put in play for a system.
And you took a really unique kind of approach to that, because you talked about, hey, what is the right thing to do here? Because it's not even, this was before AI or the impact of AI or the impact of social media or big data was really understood widely. You were looking at, even at that time, you're looking at what is the human cost and what's the human benefit for building these systems while building these systems. And it seems like that focus has continued through the book, since the book.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that book fired me up. I mean, I was already pretty fired up about, there has to be a different way to approach the kinds of systems that have become ubiquitous. I mean, I think thinking about, in some ways, how early we are in integrating digital systems into our everyday lives, how true and not true that is globally, like how unevenly distributed access to digital systems is. And at the end of the day, even if they don't exist in a particular place, we've all seen centers of power become dependent on them. So whether it's a government and how it distributes information, how it's getting information about a vaccine, being able to, like it's so fascinating to see how quickly we've adopted technologies that are ostensibly social conduits. There are environments, if we think about social media, but even for any of the technical systems we have, what we might call infrastructure, they are so much a part of facilitating communication and information exchange. Right. So it's not really a person and a device anymore. There's no, shrink wrap box with a CD-ROM that's part of the picture. So looking at platform economies, looking at digital labor that spins out of a platform that's calling a person to a task, whether it's labeling content or picking somebody up for a ride, it's really a reorientation to what role do digital technologies and their reach play in our day-to-day experience of life, work, play, sleep. So it's seeing the shift from that being fairly peripheral in the early aughts, early 2000s, to that being, again, taken for granted as just how you share information, get information, how you communicate. And it's it's tough to track that that's not happening individual to individual. That's happening at a societal scale. That's an interesting and challenging thing to study. So most of my work has been thinking there's a great deal of responsibility that should be attached to building systems that are also social exchange, in the same way that we may think governance of any kind is something that requires a collective decision-making, right? So, my interest is thinking about the responsibilities that come with, across, and the agreements we're making that come across all of these systems, both the ones, the companies, the people that design these systems, sell these systems, but also each of us, like, what are our responsibilities to each other? I mean, we haven't really asked that question.
Which is fascinating that we haven't asked this question. As you said, that just is a testament of how early we are in this domain, right? And I think you were part of this, the committee, the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine Committee, that tried to ask and answer that question. And when I read the report, I was blown away by the cross-section of participants, right? It was obviously you, but then Tina Quare, the former Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court, John Hennessy, the chairperson of Google, Barbara Grosz from Harvard, one of the founders of multi-agent systems and foundational work in NLP. There were people across industry. There were, senior partner at McKinsey. Seems like this, those questions are being asked and at least partly being answered using a cross-domain, intellectual powerhouse. Tell us about this committee and what was the genesis of it? How did you become part of it?
Yeah, I mean, again, after Ghost work, I was really focused on what would it take to reorient computer scientists, engineers, and the other disciplines that really feed the approach that we take to building systems. What would it take to reorient them to picturing that their main responsibility isn't to data? Because I think, right, it at least probably 5 years ago, the focus was on how do I protect and defend data? How do I keep data de-identified as a way of protecting people? And my interest was in what follows if we refocus our attention and see people and social groups as our object of not just analysis, but the constituency to which those building systems are obligated. So that report came from really Barbara Grosz and her vision of how much her discipline and how much it needed to come from her discipline's current dilemma about, like, what is it that it can be doing differently. And she was one of the first to really track, like, it will require us thinking at the very beginning, what could happen, what follows. And in most cases, not all, but in most cases, a computer scientist, an engineering developer, anybody with that background, they're not actually trained to be able to think about the context that's going to tee up what could follow, who's going to benefit. So because computing has mostly approached this as a data problem, it hasn't really thought about what changes if I don't assume people are hot swappable, units, that we're all just kind of the same. She's the one who really made a point of populating this study that was commissioned by the National Science Foundation, that was requested by Congress when it was looking at the AI Accountability Act. It was really trying to figure out, like, okay, if we're going to be accountable, what do we need to change about these disciplines, these scientific approaches to innovation? So she very smartly was looking for representatives from different areas, not just computer science and engineering, who could speak to domains where the ubiquity of computing systems and the growth of AI absolutely has been moving forward without the input of those domain experts in health, in labor, in economics, thinking of the folks who are around the table. And she, hats off to her. She was the one who really saw what we need most is to understand what happens when we wait until something's built to evaluate it. That is really too late.
Which was the most, I think the most surprising, probably the most fascinating takeaway from, first of all, I didn't think it was an accident that, the former White House advisor was on the committee, and legal scholars were on the committee, and healthcare specialists were on the committee. But tying back to what you said, this idea that it might be too late when the system is built and deployed, that seemed like, even now that I went back to prepare for this, I went back and reread some parts, and it seemed like that was a very fascinating, pretty sweeping call to action. So, and kind of goes a little bit, flies in the face of what we have been operating under for the past several years.
Yeah, I mean, to me, if you take seriously the call to action that is in that report, it is saying we no longer can afford to probe, perturb, A/B test our way through systems that operate at the scale at which they operate. And I'm hesitant to use the word scale. I mean, it's more a matter of they have, and I know we have great conversations about this, they're completely unregulated. So the reality is anybody who wants to build a system and put it out there, right now, there's very little that they're called upon to account for in terms of how much did you think about what would be the differential impact of what you've built. And again, that to reorient to that requires conceding that moment of prototyping. There is already embedded in there a set of assumptions that have to be qualitatively interrogated. Like there isn't, and there is, I think that the fun thing is like, there is a way to do this. We all, this is who's on this call, is like, you can qualitatively analyze, rigorously understand a question that you're posing that you think technology is going to answer, and start with that. Like you can start with like, what is the presumed question? To do that, you've got to get a crew of people together who are the subject matter experts who can help identify those assumptions. But it's the exciting thing to me is like, we haven't even started trying this yet. I mean, it's, and I'm curious what happens when we let go what is ostensibly the power of not having to ask somebody's opinion, not validating it as expertise that, we don't have. Like, what could we build together? It's exciting.
Which is so funny because I'm part of like various like research groups of researchers. I'm talking about like practitioner, user researchers. And often people ask me, hey, what role does researcher have in an AI system? And I think from what this report is recommending and we recommend is everything, right?
Everything.
Like it should start with research.
Yeah. I mean, we've really been absorbing for the last decade, I would say, bluster that hasn't been explained to the general public, that there's something quite powerful about just having a lot of data. And it is powerful. It's still a pile of data. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't tell us anything. And it can't, it can't interpret the world. That's a human capacity. And I used to try and be a little more tentative about this, but now that we have arguments about sentient AI, I would love everybody to read anything by Emily Bender. She's a fantastic NLP researcher. She's done such a good job of calling out AI hype. And my frustration is it is a pretty amazing technological feat to be able to take those priors and reproduce without, the structure of what you could be predicting to come up with a prediction that would be useful. It means nothing if you don't have people trained to understand how did that decision come to be made, and most importantly, how is that a decision that cannot be replicated with a different group of people. So if you apply that assumption, if you apply a decision like that's hate speech, I think it's kind of obvious to all of us now, like there is no easy solution to identifying things like hate speech or disinformation through AI. We desperately need more user research to understand under what conditions does somebody look at something and think, oh yeah, that's right. And we're never going to get to the place where misinformation, disinformation, hate speech are static or stable enough to stop needing user research. So I almost can't understand how somebody thinks AI happens without user research.
Which was what was kind of the eye-opening part of this report, and in general, has been how much focus there has been. For example, in this report, this was a very dense report. It's like 100 pages, but pretty dense.
Yeah.
It's not a light read. Let me put it this way. Right?
I was about to say it's not a painful read. I would.
No,
and it's got a summary, everybody. So
no, it's not a painful read. It's definitely something that I encourage everyone to read. We'll put the link out. It's basically a report on how the next generation of computing system, though a lot of focus, I would be, I'm presuming a lot of the assumption is that the next generation of systems are heavily influenced by AI. And it calls out, among other things, research methodologies that should be used, like practical research methodology. It's the only kind of methodology related discussion that happens. So it seems that this focus of AI systems and focus of research and researchers in these large scale systems or AI systems is shifting from, hey, we don't even have a UI, or the UI is very simple. I don't have a role as a researcher to play in this, to, somebody needs to define what hate speech is. And somebody needs to redefine hate speech, the term, among various societal contexts, right? We need to see how it evolves. So you end up becoming it ends up becoming such a core part of the problem definition itself. And the fact that this committee agreed upon that, and that was I have a feeling you had something to do with the recommendations and methodologies, being a qual researcher yourself, being put in there.
I'm going to say, like, that committee intellectually was unbelievable. I mean, it was fantastic to be in a room, Zoom room with so many brilliant people coming at this question, and with a lot of humility and willingness to consider rethinking, like, what do they think can be done, should be done. And I'd be the first to say, we had our moments. All the meetings and public sessions are documented. You can go to the National Academy site and hear us grappling with, okay, what will be a tractable, a feasible way to integrate, say, an anthropologist or a political scientist or a critical race scholar in the process of innovating systems. And I think, to me, one of the key things that, yes, I definitely was advocating, and I was really happy to see the uptake, was a clear willingness to see, much like security for computer science and engineering, again, just staying within those narrow disciplines, there is a collaborative approach to needing who you need to bring in to refine what you have in mind. So there's already I think a helpful disposition, orientation to the problem. And so that kind of team sport approach to building systems, it lends itself to incorporating UX research. What I see from, again, 10 years of being inside a large tech company, granted from the research side of the house, that's often, the walled garden of this environment. What I can see is that user researchers they're expected to do a lot of work that really needs to be spread across a range of subject matter experts, including the person who's going to be experiencing the pain and the benefit of that system. And I don't just mean the person, I mean like categories. I mean like categories of people, groups of people. Like we have to really reorient to, we are not solving problems for individuals. We're looking at social relationships and being able to study, make the unit of analysis for the build a relationship among different institutions and people. That's new. So I feel like there's the need for the UX researcher that is thinking about UI, that it's trained, the person trained to deliver the best design approach to engagement is a part of a team. And that's actually a lot of what I've been doing the last couple of years, mostly through the pandemic, is like, what is that dream team that you want together from the very beginning, from ideation? A huge part of that, it's community groups or constituencies that in any case, we all have somebody in mind who might benefit from what we build. So, tools like Marvin, those being able to really have I call it big data. It's like having that qualitative perception of a range of takes on how are we interacting right now. Like that's the hardest part. Like some of that may not be necessary. You can't know what you need in qualitative research until you've collected it. And so unlike telemetry, that's just kind of like, big gobs of things and you can kind of sort through it. Qualitative work, we all know, like it's about the collection, so you can go back and see what seems maybe in the moment negligible turns out to be incredibly important. And that team approach to doing that, that's new too.
And that begs the question of what does that mean for an individual researcher or a small research team, the non-academic type? How is their role going to evolve, especially in the role of AI? I don't see a lot of AI companies. I see very few companies that are core AI companies employing researchers, right? I would guarantee, like if you go to like OpenAI or any of these other companies, I don't think they have like a large team of researchers. I don't think they're thinking about it in that sense. They might have one or two researchers on staff. What does that mean for them? What is their next stage?
Right. Well, and I think this is the toughest thing, is that we're not seeing the metamorphosis that happens with every startup and every company and every merger and acquisition. So maybe back to ghost work, like there are moments in the development of any of these approaches to decision making that require all hands on deck, like groups of people looking at a particular situation. So for example, if you think about sentiment machines or OpenAI, at different moments in the development of those companies, they've employed linguists. They've had really good folks on their team thinking about language models, thinking about what it means to be annotating training data and who's doing that annotation. Some of those companies are the first to be thinking, gosh, I really need expertise in the annotation, in the labeling. So there's an absolute demand for, in different moments, for developing models that involve a range of experts. The going back to like, we are early days especially if we're thinking we're ever going to get towards something that looks like a metaverse, which I'm not sure I want, but will probably happen. That's fine. We'll all make our choices, but to do that will require continually returning to, and actually importantly, having an ongoing relationship with different groups of people and UX researchers are in the best position to manage the relationships and the data collection. That to me looks much more like anthropology. You know, the big, the thing I hope, and I know there are a couple of anthropologists on this call, the thing I hope is that the frameworks and the methodologies familiar to anthropology, qualitative sociology that tend to stay really siloed in those disciplines, that those disciplines start informing HCI, other design approaches, but in a really rigorous way. Because I think right now we have this disconnect between UX researchers coming out of a range of fields or disciplines, often self-taught in terms of managing what is the real, the real meat and potatoes of UX work, which is talking with people, taking in what they're saying, being able to bring interpretation and analysis to, kind of squaring what a group of different people are saying. That, that methodology, it has traditions within disciplines that can bring more to the table than has necessarily been there. And for me, the elephant in the room is that computer science and engineering have mostly kind of treated those pieces of the build as nice to have. Mm-hmm. So when we're building AI systems, if we're going to start relying on AI systems, all of us are going to start expecting more. Like we're going to keep ramping up what we expect. There's no way to develop AI to be able to deliver more effectively and most importantly with accuracy that people will depend on. In medicine, like think about where it's going to get applied. Like when we're going to rely on that, it means we're going to need more investigation, constantly updating adjustments, like thinking, okay, why doesn't it work in this situation? Why not in that situation? So probably the toughest thing is most of our examples of autonomous systems were focused on cars, which is, not a good example of what AI will look like when it's introduced into our social exchanges, right? So I think that's the thing. Think about how much we're going to need UX research because we're talking about our social lives. It's not a car on a built track trying to figure out, will sunlight hit there or here? Like that's barely predictable. People are not predictable. We're pretty whimsical.
Go figure.
Good. I hope. I think that's true.
Yeah, no, for sure. I should mention, because I will get in trouble for this online later on. CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, is an investor in Marvin. He has no say in running of the company, but he's an investor. So that's a disclaimer I should mention here. Yeah. So what does this mean for coming back to the topic of research and researchers and it's actually really fascinating to hear you say, kind of that computer science, in your opinion, has kind of kept the social aspects or of technology at the fringe, though. I don't know, being part of the HCI community, being part of the Chi community, it is definitely feels like there is a lot more of that happening today than it was, even 10 years ago. Absolutely. But I totally 100% agree with you that I don't think the AI companies have embraced that or have even thought about it. How do you change that mindset? How, if you happen to be one of the researchers that are employed by any of these large AI companies or large AI teams, how do you drive change in Microsoft, being one of the largest drivers of AIs in the world? How do we drive that change?
I mean, it's, I think that the toughest challenge right now for me, from what I see, is that we importantly, companies and practitioners started on a road of thinking about responsible AI. Microsoft has been very involved in a lot of that action, a lot of public concern, criticism, I would say, rightly presented criticism of facial recognition, for example, systems that were clearly failing and failing society and failing specific members of society. So I think what's quite interesting is that most of what I see as potential for changing the approach we take to systems and really changing our calculus around who's responsible and what responsibility looks like is coming. It's a groundswell. It's coming from everyday people feeling that failure and feeling the pressure of systems coming at them. It's becoming adversarial, right? I mean, it's arguably been adversarial for some time. So to me, the thing I push internally is saying, look, the most important thing we can be doing is thinking about not the impact of what we've built, but the how and who we engage when we imagine what should be built. I think it's important for us to see there is no perfect system. There is no right system. There are only approaches and questions that offer opportunities for a kind of collective negotiation. A mutuality is the argument I'm making in a project I'm working on now, to orient to not just principles that we execute in some abstract way, but what are the practices that let us hold companies and each other accountable for how we proceed. That might be too, fanciful, but if you think about a system like any on-demand platform that's circulating work, there is no technical reason that we could not start from a fundamental practice and position that the data about the person doing the work belongs to them. We literally haven't found our footing yet collectively to say this. Why is this data-driven approach to AI, which absolutely fundamentally requires data if we stay on this track of machine learning, even as it needs people, it's still, it feeds on our data. Where did things go wrong that we didn't actually call the question on whether I have to just accept that data is taken from my social exchanges with people? I mean, we really do have an opportunity to ask some very basic questions about what does responsibility look like in practice, not in principle. And, I think that's the toughest thing is a global conversation, right?
100%. And I think this idea that you kind of initially introduced, this idea that, today it seems like, AI systems, in general, systems are being built around data, and kind of flipping that question from like, this is what data we have, or this is what our data allows us to do, or this is the kind of data we need to collect. Flipping that to what is a definition of these foundational problems, and how do we get the right definition to even begin asking those questions requires a lot more work. And it's a people-driven, human-centered approach rather than a data-centered approach that has been for the past decade of AI.
I mean, I think thinking about, turning human-computer interaction into human-centered innovation, like if I want to maybe, let's keep the acronym, it's a handy acronym.
Yeah.
But, back to an earlier point you made, I think HCI came up at a time, developed as computer science and engineering was realizing like, oh, this isn't a closed system. It has these social moments. And I would argue we're still at that point where CS and engineering doesn't see HCI as solving hard problems. Right?
Oh yeah,
that's
100% agree.
Right? I mean, so that again, I mean, as you pointed out, like the thing to change is the disrespect to how complex those social dynamics are, the assumption that's negligible, or all things being equal, I can just kind of, push that aside. And it's not an if, I mean, I absolutely see it around the graduate students I'm around, people coming into the tech sector. When you have people saying, like, I don't know enough to build a feature that is meant for, say, self-expression, then that's the perfect opportunity to say, we do have to spend upfront on not just user research, but social research to be able to start with the MVP that could possibly go in a direction that produces the best outcomes, the most responsible outcomes. When we start really grappling with that, I think it means we actually get a chance to pay attention to how much money is wasted buying like scads of data that are worthless. The kind of futures market of data that we could get out of that business. What we need is higher quality data and more qualitative analysis of it. And I think that is becoming more obvious, at least within my setting. It is quite frankly folks saying, but what do we do next? I'm like, there's some approaches you can take that are quite different than you're used to. That's hard, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
and if you're coming from a more, solution centric world, it's hard to say, hey, what's next, right? Like, how do we define a problem?
I think it's, especially if you feel like, I think it's interesting to see the move towards agile, agile design, agile anything, or, just perpetual beta, and think that is the way to get at kind of, moving towards perfection or something better. I don't think anybody aims for perfection intentionally, but when we get solutionist, like when we think the technology is the secret, key that unlocks some capacity for the project I'm working on, community health. Like if we think technology is going to save the day and we aren't looking at the people who actually carry out services in communities, particularly for community members who are most vulnerable, we are completely missing the opportunity economically, socially, to make a difference. And I think that the desire to really make a difference, that'll gnaw at the somewhat competitive that I see among my colleagues. They want to build the best solution. So as soon as it becomes clearer that your best route to something that's going to be robust, that really can stand up in a challenging situation, is this other approach, I think it becomes more and more attractive. It's still hard. And if anything, I don't mean this in a bad way, but if you've got a lot of folks who are not trained in this and are actually trained to be disparaging about qualitative research, couldn't tick off a list of what disciplines or classes they could have taken that they thought were stupid, then you've got this other kind of headwind to work with. And I think that is one of the challenges today in the tech sector, is contending with somebody in a more senior position who does not understand the value of qualitative research to a technical problem, nor do they understand the methodology as its own technical application of investigating a problem. And we're still not going to get it right. That's a tough one, right? Like, it's not about getting a system right.
It's about, as long as we can even define the system and like find the right stakeholders, already a pretty big win. So that actually brings out one of the questions that's in the audience, that I think is something that I've been thinking a lot about, is what does this mean for the education and training of qual researchers? As you said, qual researchers come from various different backgrounds. A lot of them get trained on the job, which is, I think it's a big plus in this domain. I think you get to see variety of people from variety of background. But if you are an educator, or if you are thinking about training your team for the future, or if you're a person who is thinking of training themselves, how do you change the not just the curriculum but mindset? How do you train your people in driving that change in the mindset? What are the implications for training students and ourselves?
Yeah. I mean, I think this I don't know that it keeps me up at night, but I do feel like one place to start that can have a lot of bang for its buck is think about how few institutions, how less than a dozen institutions end up producing most of the employees who go to the large tech companies that set the mark. They are the benchmark for any company or startup that wants to be acquired or doesn't know yet that is its ambition. So I mean, if we were looking at those institutions that train most of the folks going into tech, peripherally or core, so people within marketing who are on that campus, but certainly computer science and engineering, as Barbara Gross has worked on at Harvard through this embedded ethics in computer science approach that she's taken to creating modules that are integrated into the courses to think about responsibilities of technologists. If that was something that you learned from day one, and you had throughout your training as an undergrad, and it was part of every boot camp, part of any conversation about how do we hold ourselves accountable or responsible, that you have to interact with people who are going to carry the benefits and risks of a system that you're building. If that was just something everybody was saying, I do believe that creates the momentum for at least it to stand out when that isn't the practice. So I think that mindset comes with creating atmospheres where we hold expectations of each other as practitioners, and that if we see somebody doing something, or a team or a startup doing something that seems shady, that it not only becomes something that stands out, but it's something that we collectively say that's not okay. So my parallel to this is think biomedicine, and this is the book I'm working on is kind of making the case. There are other industries who have faced this before, where they've had to rethink what are our obligations to the people who generate the data we need to innovate. A clinical trial is not that different than an A/B test, if you think about it. In fact, they're structured to be the same idea as a randomized control trial. That means that we have, imagine in biomedicine what it would look like if a company just decides, I just kind of want to experiment here. I'm just going to try out this new drug, and I'm just going to see what happens to people. I'm not going to tell them about it. I'm just going to see, because I can see the set that I gave it to and the set I didn't. That would be reprehensible. It's illegal because of particular laws on the books that were put in place to check the science of biomedicine. So the mindset changes when we train those going into these industries what they are collectively responsible for, not individually, but literally collectively. If somebody does this in your name, it embarrasses you and brings you down. When we start feeling like that other group's behavior puts my reputation at risk, you get involved. That has made a difference, some difference. It doesn't ever change the fact that, yes, there are going to be crappy things that happen. It gives us a path to addressing that and finding how to make amends as a set of practitioners. instead of turning it into like a case of a barrel of apples and there's a bad one in there, we should root them out. That's not ethics. That's politics. Ethics is when we hold ourselves accountable and each other to a standard, and there's a standard that's actively being debated. We don't have any of that yet, but I would like to start with those 10 institutions and make it impossible to graduate without asking basic questions before you put anything into the world.
Fascinating. I totally agree. I think if we can change 10 institutions, that'll drive a massive change. And we've talked about like how computer science education, in my opinion, needs to be updated. So we'll take a couple more questions. We'll take those and then go into answering some of the audience questions. Big elephant in the room that we haven't discussed is the regulations. EU especially, California.
Yeah.
Some states have taken a very active view of this, especially and people have definitely AI and big data systems and machine learning has been under Microsoft scope. And even from the recommendations from the committee makes a specific mention of the states being involved. Do you foresee a world in which the state mandates that every AI system before it gets launched needs kind of a researcher or a team of researchers doing a study? And what does that look like, and how does that impact innovation?
Right. I mean, let me start with the last point you made, because I think right now, because there is this belief that AI innovation hinges on how much data you have access to, that would be Jan LeCun's argument, Jan LeCun at Meta. We haven't really looked at the cases where, and the problems where that's not accurate, where it's definitely debatable, and that there would be approaches where you want higher quality data and mathematical approaches, thinking I have a small data set for the training. And the higher quality data is the thing that hinges on, do you have experts who are curating or cultivating or creating that data set, right? So the challenges of AI are better solved by higher quality data than just keep throwing data at it. We've got decent evidence of that, not for every problem, but for any problem that's sophisticated, complex, creative, spontaneous. An AI system, to be able to offer anything distinct or useful to a human, has to be working with that higher quality data. I say that because it's going to be the specialization of AI that really distinguishes it, not the generalizability of it, but that it can really approach any problem and be able to see the nuance. So that's a long-winded way of saying you get higher quality data if you take this qualitative approach up front. So in my estimation, the best advocacy we could be doing right now is saying, if you're building a system, prove that you have the engagement of the subject matter experts involved in that innovation. I don't think that slows down innovation. I believe it creates much more effective applications, that the innovation comes not from spitballing what could we build, but quite surgically, with precision, saying what is the problem that we want to solve. And that right now feels antithetical to computer science and engineering, that wants to imagine a kind of mathematical abstraction that lets you not care about the content or the context. I disagree strongly with my colleagues. Less of them here, because we have more folks who agree that an approach that leads with a qualitative understanding of the problem is the best way to set up the use of a data set to model a decision. So the regulation right now, my biggest concern, if we did this state by state, it's like trying to stop the internet state by state. That's not how the internet works, right? So we would want to approach any of these systems from the assumption that, you know, somebody can build a system. What you're looking for is a company to build a system that can then be vetted, can be audited. I think there are approaches certainly talking about, you know, the conversation around fairness that tends to take up all of the air in the room to be able to talk about how do you have ongoing auditing that's meaningful, not just a moment in time stamp that says that was fair when it went out the door. That's not sufficient. It's necessary, but that's not sufficient. I want to point folks, you know, listening to this really cool project. Disclosure, I'm on their board, but it's the Data Nutrition Project. It's a nonprofit that does this. It has some fantastic approaches to thinking about how would you do qualitative reflection on the data set you have. It's actually a super complement to Hey Marvin, because you could use everything you need to be able to track what's the provenance of a data set, what are pieces of a data set that seem to be missing, and how to even think about that for a particular question or problem. So looking at tools that are going to support us in doing that detailed analysis, that could be regulated. That could be a requirement in the same way that clinical trials have sets of requirements before you release a drug, that also have sets of requirements that once it's released are being monitored. Like, we don't have any of that yet. That to me is a better use of our regulatory energy.
And I think there is open questions on how does that change the agile methodology? How does that change the way people foundationally think about building tech products today, if that's the framework that we're going to operate under? But I think that's a conversation for another day. We have a couple of questions that I really do want to talk a little bit about. I think this one is this one is kind of going back to kind of the alternative formulation of HCI that Mary, you mentioned. And it talks about how would you name an alternative concept to technology solutionism or technology determinism. I guess can we do some marketing here? Can we come up with terms that make that stark distinction even clearer?
I'm awful at this game. I think it's funny because I think of how we qualified data science. Like, that's weird. All science works with data. So I don't, I'm still stuck on that. I don't like when people put qualifiers on anthropology, like digital anthropology. I don't know what I would, what's different there. So, I mean, I think the concept we're looking for is to, how the echoing of, don't build it. I think what we're missing is let's stop thinking tech fixes things. It can't fix anything. It can assist us in addressing the needs we have in the world. And I think that's the thing. It's like it's never a solution. It's always, a part of shaping how we think about what will work and won't. There's no escaping that. That's what technology does. It makes us think about like possibilities, but we'll really have arrived when we stop thinking of tech as an it and think about how much technical systems are they're part of the fabric of our social lives, our social interactions. So, you don't fix or solve socialness. You just do it.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, we are over time. 1 in 15 seconds. One takeaway from today's conversation.
Qualitative research is more important than ever. AI does not replace it, and in fact, it will increasingly need what it is that people are doing who are on this call today. And the most important thing we can do is make sure we stay the course and say humanity deserves the attention that UX research has to offer. It's core to anything we're going to do that's meaningful.
Hallelujah. That is fantastic. That is our message as well. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Mary.
Oh.
This is always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you everyone for joining.
Anytime.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank
Thanks
you.
everyone.
Thanks